Thank you very much. Thanks for the opportunity to talk to you all today. And sorry I couldn't be with you there in Cape Town. So my name is Nick Mothershaw. I'm Chief Identity Strategist at the Open Identity Exchange. And I thought I'd kick off with, jump it around a little bit, lively. I'll kick off with a little bit about who we are. And then what I was going to talk to you about today is a piece of work we did last year and are now continuing to evolve around the DNA of digital ID, and where we're going to now with it is how does that enable both trust framework comparisons and, in due course, roaming wallets. So we are a membership community, and our members here are listed on the screen. We have big corporates, we have small boutique consultancies, we have ID tech companies. So we've got a good mix of members, and our members share a common vision, which is enabling us all to prove who we are instantly, not just who we are, but what we are eligible to do. So it's not just about the identity element, but also things like our education credentials, our travel credentials, health credentials, and that we can do that in a consistent way all around the globe. So that's a pretty lofty long-term vision, that we have this full interoperability of identity and eligibility infrastructure across the globe. But by setting that vision, we can make steps in that direction. So we do that in three ways. We do a lot of thought leadership. That's an example of which is the DNA work that we're going to talk about today. But we're also looking at frameworks for wallets. We're looking at commercial models around wallets and how that will evolve. We've done a lot of work on inclusion in terms of making sure people are included in any digital ID ecosystem that is created. And we publish those as either papers or guides on our website, and we have a full guide to trust frameworks on our website, which will be updated to embrace wallets more fully later this year. In the middle there, we do a lot of influencing and insight. So we respond to government consultations. We work directly with governments on some of our papers and projects, as we did do with the DNA work. We help promote new members' services. And we provide our members with market insights. So that's a kind of two-way element. So we do a lot to help members understand what's going on in the broader market. And then we do a lot around promoting identity as well. And that's necessary because there's a lot of myths around identity, both from the acceptors of ID, or relying parties, as we often refer to them, and from the end user themselves. There's lots of fear around privacy, around biometrics, around fraud. So we do a lot of work there. We've produced a set of videos, which you can find on our website, that enable you to explain to end users and businesses why digital ID is safe, and why some of the fears they may have are unfounded. So and we continue to do a lot of that and continue to promote the vision and the utility of digital identity. Just a little bit about what we do, moving on to focus on this particular piece of work that we've done. We did a piece of work last year where we analysed 8 different trust frameworks, or schemes, or solutions, if you like. And MOSIP, I think, is on the list here. People would argue that's not a framework, it's more of a solution platform, but it supports different frameworks around the world, such as Philippines. What we did with this is we read the policies, and for the first 3, we read in detail the policies that they publish, and then started to draw out the common characteristics that they exhibited in those policies. For the next 5, then we went to having done that with the UK, EU, US, we went to a questionnaire approach with the other 5 partners we worked with here, who then filled in what their policy characteristics were, and then we did some work with them to ratify that and normalise the work. And what we discovered as part of this process is what we end up calling the DNA of digital identity. And what we found was that all of these different frameworks or solutions cover common policy areas, and all in some way address the key element of identity assurance. Is this the genuine individual, and is it them who are holding the digital identity that's been presented right now? So we drew that out as a very specialist area of these frameworks, because a lot of the other areas we found are general legal elements that you would find in any kind of digital trust framework, or indeed any trust framework anywhere. Roles, complaints and disputes, data management, fraud management, prohibitions. We ended up with these 15 different areas that were common across the different frameworks that we analysed, which was good news, because that means that achieving interoperability should be possible. I'll come on to some of our thoughts about how that's done in a moment. The kind of thing you can't read and deliberately can't read down the side, that's what it looked like when we zoomed out on the analysis. And that, when we did that, I wanted to show the scale of what we'd done, and we did that. And at one time it was a lot more colourful, and it looks a bit like when you see a DNA sequence that's published, that's printed off, it looks a bit like that, and that's where the inspiration for this DNA of digital ID came from. But I think it's a good analogy because it shows that whilst these frameworks are doing things in slightly different ways and have their own distinctiveness, and that's necessary for their particular policy approach in their countries, they are essentially the same species. They're doing the same thing, solving the same problem. The 15 general policy areas, a little bit of a zoom in on this, but they, as we did our analysis, what the graph there showed is the kind of, we ended up with 79 characteristics with 283 possible values. So that's 79 different policy elements, characteristics, such as how do you handle consent, what do you do in terms of fraud data sharing, what about inclusion, what about your trust mark, how is that displayed, what responsibilities do you put on relying parties. So there's a whole host of and wealth of information in there that enables us to explore what a framework does. And then across those 79, there are 283 possible values. And what was interesting is that the number of characteristics on the blue line at the bottom there flattened off pretty quickly in our analysis, which showed us that yes, frameworks are addressing the same characteristics, but they are doing them in different ways. The line on the top there continued to grow as we did our analysis, but it was flattening off as we went. So that tells us there are probably, not never a finite, but a decreasing number of possible values that we will find as we continue to add other frameworks to the analysis. All of which is good news if we then want to do comparisons of frameworks and work out how identities are exchanged. And then on the identity assurance side, we found that everyone had an assurance policy model that works in a common way. Sometimes this is very simple. So if you've got a national digital identity, which is a card, and you wish to digitize it, that's your single accepted credential in our step one here. You would validate that that is a genuine card by some method, maybe a reader or via visual inspection. You would verify that the individual who's purporting to be the holder of that card is in fact the individual, and again that might be by a visual inspection or by a reader, and then you would issue them with a digital identity. So that but what we found with some of the countries where they didn't have that foundational or single national digital ID, they had a much more complicated model because they're having to use proxy credentials, passports, driving licenses, bank accounts, telco accounts to formulate a level of trust around an individual. So we came up with this model which has worked across all the different frameworks we've tried to apply it to so far. It is complex, it has a lot of options, but it does show that we are able to move from framework to framework with a particular set of credentials. And from all of this, we talked about creating something called the Open Criteria Exchange Tool, a method for not just frameworks themselves to describe their policies, but for issuers of credentials to describe the policies that apply to them, and for relying parties, acceptors of ID, to request the policy conditions and criteria that they would accept in any presentation. So we realize this is not just for frameworks, that this information is invaluable policy information that applies and can be expressed by all these different parties in the ecosystem. So we continue now to explore how that would work, the value of that, and initially, how can we help frameworks on a comparison basis? One of the things on the identity assurance side we saw was that there are 5 golden credentials. The national ID card is probably the most golden, the platinum one, if you like. If you have that, that is what is used for the root of trust in a digital identity. But where you don't, what we saw frameworks were doing, we're using passports, bank accounts, driving licenses, and telco accounts as the proxies, and this was consistent. So one of the things we're calling for now is standards for these credentials, because if these can be standardized, we can then formulate a level of trust in the user based on the credentials they hold in their wallet. We don't have to align levels of assurance from country to country. And when we talk to policymakers about that, they don't want to do that. They've set their levels of assurance at particular levels of trust that meet their policy requirements. The concept of trying to align a European IAL2 with a NIST, European substantial with a NIST IAL2, they've done some analysis on that, but they don't quite match And our solution is not to make them match, it's to use the credentials to formulate a level of assurance as you go. And this is what we're exploring now, further in our working groups with the frameworks we continue to work with. So to do that, we need to know that a credential meets the policy requirement. So our work now has moved towards understanding the policy needs to describe credentials and how do they fit into a trust framework. So we're working on that in the working groups at the moment and through the City Summit, which I know some of you will be involved in later on today. And as part of this, again, we found that there were only a handful of actual validation and verification methods, but behind these, there are scant standards. There are some standards for things like presentation attack detection, for scanning documents using a reader, but most of these areas we're pretty lacking in standards. So again, our paper calls for standards in particular areas to enable this interoperability of credentials. And all of this is about driving towards a world where my wallet will roam. So I might have a wallet that my home trust framework is the UK, and it's recognized there. When I travel in this example to the US, I would want my wallet, we've called it here a smart wallet, to still work. I don't want to get another wallet in the US and gather new credentials in the US or put my credentials in that. In the same way as my phone roams today, I want my wallet to roam in the future. So this is the ecosystem that we're trying to move towards as we go forward. And it does that by adapting to the rules of the destination framework it encounters, because those rules are expressed in a consistent way, the same way as its home framework expresses them. So it can understand what credentials are now acceptable and what levels of assurance can be derived. And we're looking at using this in static and dynamic decision making. If you're Identiverse, I'm running a workshop on that next week, and examining whether the dynamic element of this, where the wallet does genuinely adapt dynamically to every new policy it encounters, is a pipe dream, or is that possible with the right tech? But certainly the static element of declaring, well, I've done an analysis on the wallet, and therefore I'm now going to accept it into my framework, should be possible, and the tools we've created here should enable policymakers to help make those decisions. I'm just conscious of time, so I'm going to just very quickly, I've already touched on this. We don't think assurance policies will or should align. They are written for different risk levels and different local appetites in terms of where you need to pitch the level of assurance. We think rather that the local level of assurance will be formulated from the credentials in the wallet in a dynamic or semi-dynamic way as a wallet roams around the globe. So the need for alignment moves away. The need for a standard methodology, which we have identified and defined, then is required to do that formulation. So you can see all of this in the paper. It's on our library. The QR code there on the screen will take you to a link directly to that. If you're not a member, you will need to just let us know who you are, so we can make sure we follow up with you to see what you think of the paper and whether membership is of interest, but it's freely available other than that. So do get hold of the paper. It's not very long. We deliberately kept it as short as we could, but it does explore in more detail the analysis we did. It doesn't share all of the characteristics and values we found. We haven't shared those at the moment. We will be sharing those within the City community very shortly, and because we're working with the frameworks we did the analysis on to make sure they're comfortable that we share their values that we found as part of the analysis. And we will be adding more frameworks very soon as we move through the summer.
Great, so, that's perfect. Thank you. Oh, sorry, one more word?
Yeah, so just the next steps in collaboration with City, we're now kind of turning this work outwards to get more stakeholder input. We're looking at trust framework comparison tool based on the spreadsheet we created behind this and turning that into at least a rough comparison tool that people can use very quickly. We're exploring those static and dynamic approaches. We are looking at the rules for credential trust in particular. What our work identified is that is key in not just future wallet ecosystems, but in interoperability. So we're going to be doing a lot of work on that, and that's one of the key elements of City. And what's the governance required for that to make that work across frameworks? So, sorry, that is the last.
Excellent. Thanks very much. Okay.